The Senate's going to take on a $78 billion bipartisan tax bill that got out of the House last night with 47 Republicans and 23 Democrats voting against it. Joining us right now, Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold. Good morning to you, Brandon. I know you've gone over the text of this bill. You support it because it does expand the child tax credit and also some corporate tax breaks. Tell us more about it.
Yeah, I think it's a really good balanced bill, and that is to say it has these pro-family provisions, a child tax credit expansion, and what it does is index that child tax credit for all recipients. Right now, we've dealt with so much inflation. Most portions of the tax code are indexed to inflation. That means they increase as inflation increases. Social Security benefits are indexed to inflation. The child tax credit needed to be indexed for inflation. This bill takes care of it. At the same time, it has a lot of really good business-based provisions. Many of them were in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, and we all know how great an economy we had in 2018, 2019, heading into the pandemic. I think this will help restore that job growth and that rapid pace of economic expansion that we had a few years ago.
How is the child tax credit in this bill different than the one we saw in 2021? Because then, as we know, checks were mailed to parents.
Yeah, it's vastly different. Let's be clear. That child tax credit that was passed during the pandemic was a disaster. It increased the amount of the credit up to as much as $3,600 per kid. But more importantly, what it did was get rid of the work requirements that have traditionally been associated with the child tax credit. Typically, you have to work in order to get the credit. That said, you no longer have to do that, so it did become more of a welfare program. This reinforces the work requirement portion of the child tax credit. And like you said, there was a very strong bipartisan vote last night in the House of Representatives. And I think that's a real powerful message that work requirements need to be part of the child tax credit going forward.
And there was a big question, too, about whether or not checks would actually be sent out, because the House Ways and Means Committee said the Biden administration would be prohibited from, quote, manipulating the bill's tax relief in an attempt to send politically timed refund checks. But there's also some questions, as you mentioned, too, as to what this means for the 2017 tax bill. How about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think there's a lot of opportunity for the Biden administration to have politically motivated tactics here. We'll see if I'm proven wrong, because obviously they're going to try. But in this particular instance, most of the child tax credit expansion does not happen in this tax filing season. It happens for the 2024 calendar year, but people won't reconcile their taxes until the spring of next year, after the election. So I don't think there's a whole lot of opportunity for mischief that'll take place there.
There was some opposition by progressive Democrats as well as conservative Republicans for various reasons. Now, the progressives say the child tax credit didn't go far enough. Conservatives say it's only going to discourage some Americans from working. But what are the chances for the bill in the Senate? And will we see a quick vote, do you think, in the Senate, or do you think it's going to stall in this case?
Yeah, first of all, we always get opposition from both parties whenever we have a massive piece of legislation. We had a number of Republicans oppose the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act back in 2017. That was a big mistake. And this will be a big mistake, I think, on their voting record here. But the Senate, we'll see what happens. I don't think they're going to take it up quickly. The Senate is a deliberative body. They like to take their time. They have other bills on their plate right now. So I do think we're looking at least a couple weeks before they're able to process this legislation.
Very quickly, you said this bill is going to be paid for by clawing back a pandemic-era tax credit that is clearly no longer needed. How much will it cost?
Yeah, it's about an $80 billion bill. It's a pretty substantial piece of legislation. That pandemic-era tax credit they earned, the employee retention tax credit was outdated. It was being abused. There was so much fraud associated with it. It was time to go. That is going to offset the cost of this bill, so it's not going to have a significant impact on the deficit. That's a really good thing. Our debt is way too large. It's out of control. Unfortunately, we're not going to add to it here.
Executive Vice President of the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold. Always great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Jen.